Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mary Mehsikomer at TIES. I am also your Minnesota E-rate coordinator for schools. This afternoon, we're going to talk about all of the changes to the E-rate, the federal E-rate program. What I'm going to do is I will go over the main changes first, and then I will talk about those things in further detail as we go on. The morning session we finished up in the content was done in about an hour and a half, and that was including some questions. There's someone out there that I'm hearing papers rustling and stuff. If you could all just check to make sure you're muted, that would be great. Okay, so I'm going to share my content. Mark, will you let me know if this is coming through okay?
Yep. And we also have one person on the phone, it looks like, so if they want to make sure that they're muted, that would help too.
Yes, that would.
See, this is Barb from the Northwest. Is the live streaming set up to work? I got an email from somebody saying that they couldn't get it to work.
It is on, and they probably sent that to you before I got it turned on. So it is running right now. I'm watching it, so it is functional.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And Mary, we do see your content. If there are any sites that don't see the content, go to the today's meet. I'll have to say what it is. https://today's meet todaysmett.com/MN E-rate, MERATE. So if you don't see the content, if you can go to that website and let me know, I can try to make it so you can. All right, carry on.
Thanks, Mark. I would like to start today by extending a huge thank you to Mark Johnson at ECMEC, who's doing all the coordination of bridging all of our video sites today, and then also to all of you in the different regions of the state for making your sites available and helping us connect with you so that I could share this good news with lots of different people all at the same time. So the slides that I'm using this afternoon are a Google shared doc, so you can get to it with the URL that is showing on your screen. It is goo.gl/T, the number 2, capital C, 0, M as in Mary, and then Q. So that's a link to the slides. These will be up for you all year long, so you can go back to them and refer to different things if you need to, or share them out with other people who need to have this information who maybe couldn't join us today. Here's my contact information as well. I am your Minnesota E-rate coordinator for schools, so if at any point during the process you have questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. The one area of time that I will be difficult to reach is, of course, December 5th through the 10th, which is the day before and after and surrounding our major TIES conference that we have here in Minneapolis. And as a staff member of TIES, I'm completely absorbed by that for several days there. But otherwise, please feel free to get in touch with me if you have questions. As Mark indicated, we do have, for anyone on the video stream or anyone in the audience, we do have a back channel conversation going at today's meet. And I have posted the link to the slide deck in the today's meet as well. And just know that you can also put your questions in there. If you do say rude things about me, I will see them, just so you're warned. But if you don't care, go ahead and post them anyway. So go ahead and join that today's meet session as well if you want to. So I'm going to start out by giving a little background about the changes in the federal E-rate program goals that have taken place over the last year and a half. About a year and a half ago, the FCC issued what they call a call for comments or proposed rulemaking, where they asked for nationally for people to suggest different changes and things around the E-rate program. And one of the things that came out of this was that the FCC basically reviewed the whole program and decided they needed to set different priorities for it and change program processes to meet those priorities. So they've established 3 new goals for the E-rate program, the first being to ensure affordable access to high-speed broadband for schools and libraries, for schools to support digital learning and robust connectivity for libraries to provide service to their patrons and customers. The second thing that they decided for a goal was they want to maximize the cost effectiveness of what we are all spending for E-rate supported purchases. So there's going to be some things that I'll refer to today in terms of transparency measures and openness of data from the E-rate program that will tie to this goal. And also to make sure that school and library customers are being charged fairly for services and are not being charged more than your basic residential customer for services. And then the third goal is, as always, to make the E-rate application process and other E-rate processes faster, simpler, and more efficient. And I think you'll see some measures in what I'm going to tell you about today that do move them towards that goal as well. So that they basically looked at the whole program, set 3 new goals for it, and have made some corresponding policy and procedure changes. So the significant changes, the first major one is they have set aside funding now for what we used to call internal connections, or what you might be familiar with as priority 2 expenses. What they decided is if they were really going to try to provide some equitable outreach to schools and libraries across the country for internal connections pieces, that they needed to establish a budget for that. In the past, you might recall that they funded all of the priority 1 or telecommunication services and internet access services priority 1, then with whatever money they had left over, they went to priority 2. They have now specifically decided they're going to set a target of funding for what we used to call priority 2. Okay, so that means that several program changes in how they're going to determine who gets that funding, and I'll talk about those today as well. They want to test this new equitable approach to funding internal connections for the next 2 years. So they've set aside this target of $1 billion for the next 2 years, and they're going to study how all these new procedures work and make further determinations after 2016. A lot of the advocacy groups around E-rate were really advocating for an increased amount of funding because, as you know, the last couple of years there's been no funding available for internal connections. It all went to the priority 1, ongoing internet access and telecommunication services. And the FCC realized they needed to do something if they were going to provide any kind of internal connections funding at all. And they balked a little bit at raising the amount of funding that goes into the E-rate program without wanting to make some program changes first and see how things went before they assess that need. There's a lot of, as you can imagine, there's a lot of politics around trying to increase the contributions. I shouldn't call them donations because they're a fee on our phone bills, but there is sometimes a huge process behind trying to get increases to those fees on your phone bill, and so they wanted to kind of study what they could do with existing funding first. They're also reorienting the E-rate program to support high-speed broadband by phasing out support for voice services, regular phone service, and eliminating some support for some things that have previously been E-rateable. And I will tell you what those things are here in a little bit. So the first big change here that we're going to see is that we're replacing some language here. So what we used to know as Priority 1 and Priority 2 are now called Category 1 and Category 2. And that might seem like a small change, but it is significant in that they're no longer considering the things that are in Category 1 as more important than what's in Category 2. They're trying to accommodate both pools of service. So that's why they've removed the priority reference language and changed it to Category 1 and Category 2. Category 1 will work much the way that we are accustomed to in terms of what's eligible in that category and how you obtain funding for it. Category 2 is the new game in town, if you will. So we'll spend a fair amount of time talking about that Category 2 this afternoon. With Category 2, under that $1 billion that the FCC has set aside for Category 2, there is a provision for schools and libraries to establish budgets for requests for category services, and I'll explain how all that works. But this is the effort to make sure that there is funding reserved for services in Category 2 so that schools and libraries can take advantage of them. All right, so Category 1, again, remains what we have been familiar with. It is external connections to the internet and data telecommunication services or broadband data services. Think about this one as your connection from the internet to the school district or school or library and back again. So this is your external connections. All right. Category 2 is the piece where there's $1 billion available each year nationwide. It also has a new discount matrix, so it's got a slightly different discount matrix associated with it that requires a minimum commitment from an applicant of 15%. So in other words, this discount matrix starts at 20% and caps at 85% instead of 90%. And I'll show you the visual of the matrix itself in a little bit so you'll see what I mean. And this category focuses on connections within the school and primarily providing broadband speeds within the school through wireless networks. So how are these budgets figured? Category 2 budgets, schools are limited to a budget of $150 per student pre-discount request over a 5-year period. The budget is set by school site and cannot be shared across all the sites except for shared services and equipment, and I will explain that in greater detail. Libraries are limited to a $2.30 per square foot total pre-discount request over a 5-year period, and this replaces that old 2 in 5 rule that we used to have with E-rate, where a school district or library or non-public school could only receive funding for internal connections twice in 5 years. So this new scenario with establishing a budget and having schools apply for funding within the constraints of that budget replaces the 2 in 5 rule. Now, whether or not the $1 billion is going to be enough to fund all of the requests that come in on the Category 2 is a matter of speculation. I really have no clear idea what the case will be there, but just so you know, they have made an attempt here to set aside some funding for Category 2. So more school districts and libraries will have access to that, and not just those on the very high end of the economic needs scale or the highest discount amounts. So I'm going to just stop right there and see if anybody has any questions so far. And I'm seeing the chat is quite busy here. Somebody said, I'm here to see what the new stuff has for those of us with Wi-Fi throughout the buildings and already paying for robust bandwidth. Tim, we will get back to that shortly.
And there's the question about servers.
Yep, there's a question here about servers. Servers are not covered under the new E-rate 2.0, with the exception of there is a provision for caching. Okay, so I'll just answer those off the top so that those people have their question there. But I'll talk about a lot more about what's eligible in more detail. So eligible services, the good news is that Category 1 is the same as what used to be Priority 1. So those are your external and building-to-building fiber or internet connections. Those are still eligible. Okay, so Category 2 now is all mostly about connectivity within your buildings. So some of the stuff is newly eligible, some of it was eligible before, and some of it is no longer eligible. So Category 2 now covers network routers and switches, Wi-Fi access points and controllers, and wired and wireless network managed services. Okay, so those, but I'll go into more detail about those categories in a little bit. And all of these changes go into effect starting with funding year 2015, which starts on July 1st, 2015, and concludes on June 30th, 2016. So that's the year that we're starting to think about applying for funding for right now. So some of the bad news on the eligible services is that funding for voice services now will be reduced by 20% each year until you're down to zero. They are phasing out funding for plain old telephone service, long distance, those things that are associated with voice service. Okay, so that will be reduced 20% each year. So if you are a district who is at 50% discount rate, your discount for funding year 2015 for the voice services will be 30%, and it will keep going down each year until you hit zero. There are some things that are eliminated completely starting with funding year 2015. Those include email services, web hosting, custom calling services, direct inward dialing, voicemail, directory services, 900/976 call blocking, text messaging, and inside wire maintenance plans. So those things are off the table now completely as far as E-rate is concerned. And then the ugly in this situation is you may start, if you haven't already, start experiencing a lot of sales calls from vendors representing Wi-Fi manufacturers. They're all kind of putting their own spin on this and trying to get out there and get school district and library business. And actually, that's not necessarily a bad thing because we do have some new eligibility, but you just want to be careful because providers do tend to spin this to their advantage. So you want to just be careful that you're aware of what is truly eligible for E-rate and what is not. Okay, there's some changes in the program in terms of trying to improve cost effectiveness. They are going to put into place some transparency requirements for equitable pricing for schools and libraries. And basically this is a certification on the Form 471 for a start, just to make sure that you as applicants have done your due diligence, just to make sure that you are getting the best possible price for your services, And also some looking at data more intensely by the Schools and Libraries Division that runs the program to make sure that schools and libraries are not being charged more than residential customers for services. There apparently have been instances where audits have resulted in findings that vendors, service providers jacked up the prices for schools and libraries because they knew they were getting the discounts on them. And so USAC, the FCC, really want to make sure that's not happening for you. Consortia applications are encouraged. The FCC believes that school districts and libraries working together can do better with cooperative purchasing agreements and bundling purchases together, and also network efficiencies if they're all working together rather than everybody going out and doing their own thing. So consortia applications are encouraged. To make that a little easier for consortia, letters of agency have always been required for schools and libraries participating in a consortia to give the consortia administrator the authority to bid for services on your behalf. But these can now be multi-year as long as they stipulate the years for which they are in effect and what actions that the consortia head can take on your behalf. Reviews in the program integrity assurance process through E-rate review of consortia applications will be given priority. So if you are in a consortia, you are likely to see the application approved sooner rather than later, and this has not always been the case for consortia applications. And lastly, as part of the transparency requirements, your item 21, which is the additional information that you supply to SLD that goes in during the filing window after you filed your Form 471, that information is now going to be made public and available, and that will also make it hopefully easier for applicants to make sure that they're being charged fair prices, as well as seeing what other people are getting for services. The FCC is also going to be identifying some nationwide contracts that they will call preferred master contracts. This is just for Category 2 again. And you will be not required to use these contracts, but you will be required to consider these in any procurement that you do under Category 2 for E-rate. And I'll talk about those a little bit more in detail in a little bit. There's a lot of, hopefully, simplification built into the program for the coming year. For contracts that are established with a Form 470 and a 471 in the first year that have multiple years on them, there will be what I'm calling kind of an easy Form 471 that you will file after the first year. So for multi-year contracts, that will be available, but those, if you are going to be eligible to use that process, your contract has to be limited to only 5 years. If you have a site that only needs business class internet that doesn't cost more than $3,600 a year, you are exempt from competitive bidding for that particular request. You must have in place a signed contract or binding agreement prior to the Form 471 being filed. All filings with E-rate will now be electronic. They're not taking paper anymore except for some for certifications, which sometimes have to be signed and sent in the first time you're filing. And no technology plans are now required for E-rate. However, our Minnesota statute for state telecommunications and internet access equity aid still requires public school districts to have a plan on file with the Minnesota Department of Education. We have checked with the Minnesota Department of Education. They are considering action to remove that requirement from the statute, but at this time it is still in effect, and you should still still follow that requirement. And between the Department of Education and myself and your regions, will keep you posted if and when that changes. Some other simplifications, and again, I'll talk to these in a lot more detail shortly. Discounts will now be based on a school district average of eligible kids in the National School Lunch Program, not on the individual school. So your discount rate will now be just a straight district average across your school district. And it won't matter if a site that you're putting service to has 80% discount as an independent site and your other site has 70%. You'll just have a straight district average. The definition that the program uses for urban versus rural locations will be changed. They are now going to use the U.S. Census definition of urban versus rural, which is based on population density. One great piece of news for folks who pay their bills in full and then apply for the billed entity applied reimbursement, or the BEAR form, to get reimbursed. Those payments will no longer have to go through the service provider to come back to you. The BEAR payments will come directly from USAC to you as the applicant, and USAC will do the back-end work to work with the service providers. If you are filing any appeal, you must file that appeal with the Universal Service Administrative Company, or USAC, before you file with the FCC. That used to be an option. They recommended you file with USAC first, but you didn't have to. Now you must file an appeal, if you need one, with USAC before you file with the FCC. And last and certainly not least, they have extended the document retention from 5 years to 10 years. So I jokingly have been telling people they need to order more filing cabinets. But the good news on this front is they will also, SLD has indicated, they will also accept electronic copies of documents as documentation. But again, just remember, you're now going to have to hang on to everything for 10 years after the last date of service on that particular E-rate request. Somebody said 10 years, question mark, on today's meet. Yes, 10 years. I'm not making that up. Okay, so I'm going to just pause there and just see if there's any questions, and then I'm going to talk in more detail about how Category 2 works. But any preliminary questions so far? You can unmute your site and ask.
So Mary, on the $3,600 requirement on the business class internet, is that a requirement to the district as a whole for their internet access charge, or is that, could that be per building?
You know, I believe that would be, if you were filing for services as a school district, that would be a requirement for the district itself. I don't think their intent here is that you would chop up your district into a whole bunch of $3,600 requirements just to get out of the competitive bidding process. I think they'd probably figure that one out pretty quickly. But I would say if you do have a school site or a library site that is very low in enrollment and this particular service would serve it, I will be talking, is that Lauren by any chance?
Yes.
Okay. How did I know that? If that is, I'll talk a little bit more in detail. There are some speed requirements that go along with that too, which may or may not make a difference. But no, the intent there is only for if you have a single site somewhere that does require only that small amount of bandwidth, then you can exempt that. But it's not meant to get you out of the, oh, and they're zooming in on you there, Lauren. Hi. That's not meant to get you out of the competitive bidding process as a whole. But it was a great question. Any others?
Say, Mary, Where does long distance fall in? Is long distance part of the 20% reduced each year, or is it just flat out cut?
Yes, if you tell me who you are when you ask me your question, I'd just
All right,
love that.
Stephen Lee at Morris Area Schools.
Stephen, hi. It's just nice for me to know who I'm talking to. Stephen, yes, the long distance is part of the phase out, so that's part of the 20% phase out that you'll be dealing with on your voice services. Okay, anything else?
Yeah, Mary, this is Lauren again.
Go ahead.
On the direct inward dialing, the DID portion of it. So let's say you got your PRI line in, you're paying for that, and the DID portion of it is billed within that. Are you supposed to split that cost out of there and say that's the ineligible cost, and the rest of the PRI is eligible?
Technically, that is what they would want you to do, although the SLD has acknowledged that there's some cases where those things are kind of bundled in from your service provider and may not be split out. In that case, if it's impossible to split it out, then I think you could include it, but it will still be 20% reduced each year.
Right. All right, thanks.
Yep. Yeah, we were talking about that one yesterday at a meeting and the difficulty of trying to split some of those things out sometimes. Okay, anything else right now? You'll have more chances. I've got a couple here floating on the today's meet, but I'm going to hold off on answering them directly until I go through some of the other information, because I think that'll address those questions. All right, so let's talk about Category 2 and how it works. So what are Category 2 budgets? Now remember, Category 2 is the focus on building broadband connectivity within your school district or library buildings. So Category 2 budgets for each school and library in the country, they will be establishing a 5-year budget for Category 2 products and services, all right? And each individual school in a district and each library branch or outlet in a library system will have a pre-discount budget, okay? So this is budgeting. This is a budget that you will establish and kind of track. And just remember that you're not allowed to average your costs across multiple school or library budgets, with the exception of some shared service exceptions, which I'll explain in a little bit. So each school in your district and each library branch in your library system will have a predetermined kind of cap or budget amount that's set for you. Non-instructional facilities, okay, like a district office that's in a building with no classrooms, or places like that that have been traditionally considered non-instructional facilities, do not have pre-discount budgets. So this is primarily to service school buildings and library buildings. So how much is your budget going to be? Now keep in mind this is a pre-discount budget. So this is your budget before your E-rate discounts are applied. So the pre-discount budget for a school is $150 times the total number of students in that school. If your school has fewer than 62 students, your budget for the 5 years for that school is automatically $9,200. Okay? Keep in mind this is a pre-discount budget. So remember, if you are an 85% discount rate school district, your if with 100 kids, you'll have a pre-discount budget of $150,000, but the most you could get in E-rate discounts would be $127,500, because that's 85% of that $150,000 budget, okay? For libraries, the pre-discount budget for a public library is calculated by square feet. The libraries get $2.30 per square foot with a minimum of $9,200 if the library is less than 4,000 square feet. Okay, so that's how your budget's going to be determined. And remember, this is only for Category 2. Will your budget change from year to year? Yes. As you apply for funds in Category 2 and as you receive discounts on Category 2, the amount of your budget obviously is going to be decreased by those amounts. Okay? So, yes, your budget will change from year to year based on what you're doing. It also, now keep in mind that this is in place, your budget is good for 5 years, but remember that the FCC is going to study this after or during and then after funding year 2016 to see what else needs to happen. So for 2016, if your student count changes, or for a library, if your square footage increases, your budget could go up slightly. If your student count or your library square footage goes down, your budget could decrease. Okay? So it is based on your current student enrollment or your current square footage if you're a library. If for schools that are up and running today, if for some reason you have a student count decrease in later funding years, you would not be required to repay funds for money that you applied for like in the first year when you had the higher number of students, okay? But if you have a new school that you're building and you overestimate the students that are going in there and exceed your budget based on your actual student count, then you would have to return funds that are in excess of the allowable budget back to USAC, okay? So for existing schools, if you have a decrease in enrollment over the subsequent funding years after you've applied for funding, you would not need to reimburse that, but be careful about estimating your enrollments when you're building new buildings. Okay? How and when can you allocate costs across your district or across your library system for shared services? You are allowed for certain shared services to allocate costs across all of your buildings, all right? This is like if you are going to put a core router, for example, in the district office, and it's going to route traffic throughout the whole district. Things like that. So if you are doing that kind of thing, you can pay for those things with a portion of the individual school budgets. And you can allocate that in 3 ways. You can just split it across all your buildings equally. You can do it based on their student counts, or you can just decide based on whatever factor you choose to specify each entity's share of that shared service. But that's the only time you're allowed to kind of move the money around between sites, okay, is if you're doing a shared service of some kind that's delivered to all of the sites. All right, I'm going to stop there and just see if you have any questions on that Category 2, how your budget's determined or how all that works. Okay, everybody fine? Any questions here, Tiz, Mary, or Brian? You good? Okay. It's pretty compelling, isn't it? Yeah. I can tell. Yeah, all right. Okay, changes to competitive bidding. Just keep in mind that all of the E-rate procedures we've always done, most of those are still in place. We file the Form 470. It stays in posting for 28 days or more, depending on if you make any changes to it during that 28 days. And then you're able to choose your provider, and then you wait for the window to open and you file your Form 471 and so on. All of that stuff works the same that it always did, okay? All of the rules are still in place. We still have to make sure that we consider, we follow both the FCC's rules and any local procurement law that we have to follow. All of that stuff is still the same. There are, however, just a few little exemptions that are available where the Form 470 and competitive bidding is not required. The one I already spoke to was if you have a site that only needs very limited business class internet, and it's less than $3,600 a year, but it has to provide at least 100 megabytes per second downstream and 10 megabytes per second upstream, and that service and price are commercially available. Okay, so it's not you like building some sort of service out to your internet with an antenna or something. Okay, so that has to be commercially available. And that's cost. That cost is tied to the school building or the library building. Okay, and that $3,600 limit can include one-time installation and eligible equipment charges and services. Okay, that's one exemption that applies to only sites that have a very limited bandwidth need, okay, for internet. I spoke earlier about the preferred master contracts idea, also known as PMCs, and because it's E-rate, we have to have an acronym for everything. So preferred master contracts are PMCs. The FCC has not currently designated any contracts as PMCs, so you don't need to worry about that at this point. But once they do, for Category 2 equipment, if you used one of those preferred master contracts to obtain your equipment and services under Category 2, you would not have to go through the Form 470 and competitive bidding process. Okay? But again, those don't exist yet, and until they do, you'll want to just go through the process as you always have. And by the way, state master contracts, we have several of those here in the state of Minnesota that are negotiated by either MINIT, the Minnesota Information Technologies Agency, or the Department of Administration. Those are not automatically considered preferred master contracts. Right now, they're just state master contracts, and there's also some nationwide contracts out there through some providers, but these are not the same. The FCC actually has to review and decide something is a preferred master contract. So if you remember, if you are using state master contracts, remember most of ours in Minnesota are not bid through a 470 process. So even if you're using a state master contract, you need to post the Form 470, get all of your bids in, and then you can consider that state master contract pricing in and among with your other bids, because those our agencies in the state do not file Form 470s to bid out those master contracts. Okay, any questions on that? Mary, go ahead.
We have multiple contracts for service. They're not even contracts, it's Comcast month to month. Cable service. So those are separate. Do they look at the total amount, or if we have one that they're each $3,600 a year or less?
Are they, Mary, it just depends on how, are they all going to the one building? Then they would look at them collectively, so you'd probably be over the 3,600. Yeah, good question. Any other questions?
Mary, one of the on the chat, they said that what was that question that was just asked because they couldn't hear the question.
Oh, sorry. Mary asked if she's got a number of She's from a non-public school here in the cities, and if she's got a number of separate agreements with something like Comcast coming into her buildings for internet service, is the 3,600, is that applied to them each individually, or would they look at it as a whole? And my answer was, if all of those contracts are serving her one building, then the total would be considered for all of them, and it would likely be more than 3,600 because she's bringing all that service in to serve one school building. There's a number, yeah, and Mark answered a question here too. I had one that comes up a lot. If there's only one service provider in my area, how do I get competitive bidding? You still file the Form 470. Once that Form 470 is posted, you have a couple options. You are able to reach out to other providers that you think may be able to serve you. You can let them know you have a Form 470 posted after it's posted. But if there's only one provider available to you, and that's the only one that responds, you can choose that provider, but you just want to be careful and make sure it's a cost-effective choice for you. Make sure that they are giving you that lowest corresponding price. And then just document that you did put out the Form 470, that you did also, if you received any bids, any other bids, you looked at them all together and made your choice accordingly. But if you really only get one response and you just have no luck generating anything else, just document that that was the case, and that's that you chose that provider. It's the only one servicing your particular area. And I know that happens in certain places in Minnesota. Okay, I just wanted to repeat that one. It was on the chat, but I wanted to repeat it because it comes up a lot. Okay, anything else? All right, if not, I'll keep rolling. Let's talk about some of the process simplification with E-rate in the coming year. As I stated earlier, technology plans are no longer required in order to be eligible for E-rate support. Don't forget, though, that Minnesota is still requiring them for telecom access equity aid. And this is under review and may change, but right now I would just still plan on, if your tech plan is due this year to the MDE, I would just make sure you continue to comply until you're told by them that you don't need to comply with that anymore. Okay? 471s always have to be filed annually, regardless of whether you're in a multi-year contract or not. That is your E-rate application. However, under the new modernization processes, if you do a 470, bid out a multi-year contract, and sign a contract for multiple years with a 471 the first year, after that first year, you'll have an abbreviated Form 471 that you have to file. Okay, you won't have to file the full thing. But remember, your contract can't be longer than 5 years in order to qualify to do that process. Okay? In the subsequent years after you've done your initial 470 and the full 471 the first year, they will come back and ask you to, with a simpler form, to provide some basic information updates and explanations for any changes that you have in terms of discount rates and so forth. Don't just assume because your contract and your E-rate discounts got approved the first year that they'll automatically be approved in the subsequent years. Everything still goes under review every single year, even when you are doing this abbreviated process. Remember, they have done some clarification here about filing the Form 471. It used to be very gray. about did you have to have a signed contract before you filed your Form 471? Did one party have to sign the contract? Did both parties have to sign the contract? So this has now been clarified by the FCC. Applicants must have a signed contract or some other kind of legally binding agreement in place prior to filing your Form 471. Okay, and it has to be signed and dated on before the postmark date or the certified postmark date on your Form 471. Now for the Form 471, remember that one gets filed during the filing window. They haven't announced yet when the filing window is opening, but they have indicated it will likely be sometime in January and it will close sometime in March. Remember, a legally binding agreement is acceptable when you can demonstrate that a written offer and acceptance of your offer exist. Sometimes what happens for people is they've got a contract and they've got to have several people sign it, and sometimes, you know, getting all the signatures on in time is difficult. So if you have something else like a letter of acceptance and a memorandum of understanding or something else that services as a legally binding agreement, if you can't get your contract done on time, those things are acceptable. But your safest bet, if there's a contract involved, is to just try to get that contract done and signed and have that in place before you file that Form 471. A handshake agreement and a verbal agreement is never legally binding. So just make sure whatever you're doing, you've checked to see if it's legally binding. And again, remember, we have to comply with any state or local procurement rules we have in addition to these FCC rules. There's some new simplification of the discount calculation. So in the days before, we used to have to go through and calculate, for an example, for a school district, we went through the form and we filled in all of the free and reduced lunch counts for each site, and then it did a weighted average, and we had that average, but then there was a rule that we had to make sure that that discount level had been made available to that, you know, the school was being served at the appropriate discount level. So they have kind of wiped out all of that. Now we're going to have, for school districts, you're going to have an average discount for all your schools. That average discount for the district is going to apply to everything. Okay, so it's just going to be your school district average. Basically, it'll be your free and reduced price kids, the percent of those kids against your total enrollment. That's how the district is going to work. Okay. Your discount rates won't change around like they used to because you were calculating them by school. They're just going to be that standard school district average. For a non-public school or independent school with one site, you're just going to be calculating that based on the enrollment of students in your school and their eligibility for free and reduced lunch. Libraries, they get their discount from their discount comes from the free and reduced price eligibility of the district in which their main branch or outlet is located. Okay, so if a library system is located in Moorhead, for example, the Laurel system is located in Moorhead, their branch, their offices are there. They are going to get their discounts from the free and reduced price lunch eligibility of the Moorhead School District. Okay. Consortia continue to use a simple average of their member discounts. That's always been the case. That will work the same way. And then rural and urban status, because they've changed the definition and they're going to use the U.S. Census definition on that, you have to, in order to be classified rural, more than 50% of the schools in your school district or libraries in your library system will have to be classified as rural. And here is the revised discount matrix. So here you can see that Category 1 operates just the way it always did. But notice that for the Category 2, the highest discount you can possibly receive is 85%. So now there's a section of the matrix that applies to Category 1 and a separate section for Category 2. Okay, I think just a little bit more on discount calculations here. Eligible non-instructional facilities would get the same E-rate discount as the other schools in the district. So if your school district is at 50% and you're applying for E-rate access or for internet access to your school district administrative facility, that's an NIF. That discount for that facility is still going to be 50%. It's going to be the school district average. Okay. Single schools within a district will never get their own discount rate any longer. It's all based on that district average. Okay. So this simplifies it because I think what a lot of what SLD was seeing was that it got so complicated for school districts because they might have a school at 85%, they might have another school at 65%. They had their district average, but then they had to make sure that the school that had the 85% was getting the 85% discount, and the school that had the 70% was getting that, and so forth. So now it's just one average discount for the whole district. And here's the definition of school district. Those are, you all know who you are. Charter schools in Minnesota are considered districts. They have a separate district type number, but they do have a district number. And non-public schools typically operate independently, but sometimes they are in groups with a diocese or some other organizational umbrella, and they can be considered districts when they're in those situations as well. Libraries get their discount based on the percent of students eligible for free and reduced lunch in the school district in which their main outlet is. So they no longer have to calculate across all of the districts where their outlets are. They now just have they just go with whatever the discount level, whatever the free reduced lunch count is for the city or the school district in which their main branch is located. Bookmobiles, by the way, and kiosks do count as library outlets. School buses, by the way, do not. I get asked that question a lot too. So school bus is not eligible for E-rate. Consortia leaders can, as they always have been able, can seek bids on behalf of their members without being obligated to purchase the E-rate eligible services and equipment. So for Category 2, if you knew you had a whole bunch of districts in your consortium that might want to get a certain kind, might need routers, you could definitely do a consortia bid on that, but you wouldn't necessarily have to do the purchasing through the consortia, but you could do the cooperative, negotiate the cooperative pricing. Consortia leaders, though, do have to have authority through that letter of agency to act on behalf of their members, and that's always been the case. So I'm going to pause there, see if there were any questions on those discount calculation changes or how any of that works. Any here? You guys good? Okay. Okay, there's a lot going on in the chat here, but it looks like Mark and Josh are helping to answer those questions, so I think those are taken care of. You guys tell me if they're not. All right, let's talk briefly about form changes. The forms this year may look different to you. The Form 470 is pretty much the same. Very few changes to that one. That one will look very familiar to you. Just remember with the Form 470 that it has to be posted for the 28 days. Also remember that if you are doing an RFP, that RFP needs to be available at the same time the Form 470 is. So if the Form 470 goes up and you have an RFP that people can request as part of that Form 470, that RFP has to be finalized and available the minute that Form 470 goes up, okay, on the website. The new form, the new Form 471 does have a new format. They're asking some different data collection questions. And the item 21, which we always did separate from the Form 471, is now embedded in the Form 471. So the nice thing there is, if you were ever in that state of panic where you got all your Form 471s filed and then you went, oh my gosh, I forgot my item 21s, that'll all be part of the same process now. It'll all have to be done within the window time frame, but it'll all be done together. And they are not taking paper anymore. It's online submissions only. To get ready for your Form 470, remember you can start those now. Okay, so if you have those Category 2 projects in mind and can start putting out those Form 470s to get that competitive bidding process going, you can start doing those now. A Form 470 can be done anytime after July 1 of the program year for the following program year. Remember also with the Form 470, you do not have to choose the lowest cost, but you do need to weight cost most heavily in your bid evaluation. So if your whole bid evaluation is worth 100 points, cost and price is weighted at 40%, none of your other factors could be more than, or I should say 40 points, none of your other factors that you're evaluating those bids against could be worth more than 40 points. Price has to be weighted most heavily. All right, Form 471, they say, and from what I could see of it when I saw it demonstrated, that it is a clean, simple interface. It is a little cleaner than it used to be. There are also going to be templates online that you can download so you can start gathering your information that you're going to need to do that form before you actually jump on there and start the process. So you'll have the opportunity, it'll show you, the templates will show you what you're going to need for where, so you can get all your ducks in a row before you actually start the form. Paper certification, so when you sign those certification pages, if you don't have a PIN number, the way to get a PIN number is still to file a paper certification with the first form that you file in the series. That's typically a Form 470. That will generate a PIN for you. Or if you're new to the process and you don't have a PIN yet, it belonged to the former superintendent or the former business manager, whomever, you should get your own PIN. So in order to do that, you do a paper certification on the first form that you file, and that's typically your Form 470. Okay. The templates, again, will help you gather what you need to go ahead and complete the application. The non-instructional facilities, by the way, as you're filling out your Form 471, they're not considered either schools or libraries. They're considered non-instructional facilities. They're going to get the discount of the school district or library where they belong, and they don't get weighed into any of the, whether it's urban or rural, so they wouldn't count in that scenario. So if you were trying to go, for example, if you're going for rural status and you have 51% of your schools are rural, that would make you a rural school district. But if a couple of those were non-instructional facilities, that knocked you back to 49%. Those NIFs don't count in that rural-urban status piece, so that would then bump you back to an urban classification. We've talked about this, about how the schools get the discount. Consortia, we've talked about. I'll just skip past that one. The urban-rural status changes, again, these are based now on 2010 census data. The SLD website has a tool there for determining what the status is going to be for your schools. And again, more than 50% of your entities have to be rural in order for your whole district or system to be considered rural. And as you know, there is a slight advantage on the discount matrix for being a rural school district or library. Eligible services. This is where I'm going to go into a little more detail on what's eligible and what's not. Before I get started on that, any questions? There's a question on the chat. It says, what are the rural-urban qualifications? It's based, Tim, on population density, and there will be a tool on the SLD website to help you calculate that to figure out if you're urban or rural. Josh answered that one. Sorry, I'm talking out loud here. Okay. Okay. All right, let's talk about eligible services in more detail. The eligible services list is now final. It is out on the Schools and Libraries Division webpage. I'll show you where that is before we sign off today. For Category 1, generally, the eligible services are listed there. Broadband, voice services, although they are being reduced, there are some services eliminated. There are some eligibility limitations to some of the services. Dark fiber is still eligible, but just remember, dark fiber is only eligible when you plan to light it up and use it. You can't just lease or hang on to dark fiber for the sake of when you might need it. It has to be lit. Pricing transparency, again, that speaks to that whole idea of doing your level best, doing your due diligence to make sure that you're getting the best price available for the service. And then there's some different pieces in the eligible services list, which I do encourage all of you to read. It used to be about 50 pages long. It's now much shorter, and it's in the form of the FCC's actual order. So it's fairly easy to just read through it. If you're wondering about something that isn't listed, if it's not listed, it's likely to not be eligible. They've been very specific in that eligible services list about what is eligible. Okay. Category 2, some of the internal connection stuff we used to have is still eligible. Some of it's been eliminated. We are able to purchase managed internal broadband networks, managed internal wireless, and the basic maintenance on internal connections is still also eligible. So let's dig into this a little bit more. The purpose of the eligible services is now to focus support on broadband, phase out the voice services, and then eliminate some things right off the bat. So here are your eligible data transmission services. This will look very familiar to you if you've been doing data and internet access applications over the last few years. There's very little here that's any different. Remember, for anything voice related, it may still be eligible, but it's going to be subject to that phase out. All right, so here are some of the things that are subject to the phase down, the 20% reduction each year. Centrex, circuit capacity, VoIP, local long distance, plain old phone, telephone service, radio loop, satellite phone service, shared phone service, wireless phone service, including cellular voice. Those are all being subject to phase out. Okay. eliminated entirely paging. Anybody still carrying a pager? I'd just be curious. Not many people are. It's all phones now, isn't it? Directory assistance charges, text messaging, web hosting, and I know this is a ding for a lot of you. I know a lot of districts were getting E-rate discounts on sections of their web hosting, and unfortunately that is eliminated as of this year. Voicemail, custom calling, direct inward dialing, 900-976 call blocking, inside wire maintenance, and email. Those are all eliminated, no longer eligible for the coming program year. There are some very rare, and I repeat rare, cases where individual data plans can be the most cost-effective option for providing internal broadband access through mobile phones or other mobile devices, but this is only in the case where this is the only way to put wireless access, internal broadband access into a building, and there isn't already another way to do to access the internet through a wireless network. Some of the exceptions to this might be a library bookmobile would be an example of where a data plan for a phone or an air card or mobile hotspot might still be considered eligible, but for the most part these things are not. All right. Eligible internal connections. Now these are the category 2. These are the things that are going to come out of that 5-year budget that I talked about. So you can purchase access points, cabling, caching, firewalls, network switches, routers and racks, UPS, wireless, LAN controllers, and other improvements and upgrades for software necessary to support the eligible broadband internal connections components. So these are the things that are eligible. It's pretty straightforward. The things that were used to be eligible under internal connections that are no longer eligible are here. And I won't read this list to you. You can read it for yourselves. But just please note, servers are one of the things that a lot of people ask about. Those are no longer eligible. The other thing that comes up a lot, questions I get, is video components. Those are no longer eligible. We used to be able to get some components of a codec paid for under category priority 2. Those are no longer eligible. And that's it. I'm going to stop there and just see what questions you have. Fire away.
I think one good one is districts that provide mobile hotspots to students at home that don't have internet access at home, so we provide them a device. They bring the device home, but they don't have any access at home. Is that eligible?
No. No, nothing if it's taken off school campus at all. Yeah. The question here was if a district has mobile hotspots or things they send home with students so that they will have access at home, are those things eligible? And they are not. The equipment, any eligible equipment, has to be used basically on campus. What else have you got? I know you have some. Mary, go ahead.
I could look at the eligible. And do you have any examples of that last category for eligible? It's pretty broad. An example of software necessary to support eligible broadband.
Okay.
Other places it said software.
Right. That would be, Mary Matson here at TIES asked about that last category that I talked about that's kind of general, the improvements, upgrades, and software necessary to support eligible broadband internal connections and components. That would be, Mary, like if you needed to buy new software or upgrade software for your routers, to run. That would be one example. If you were doing, if there was a software upgrade for your firewalls, anything that would be software tied to an eligible component. Does that make sense? Okay.
Mary, this is Barb at the Northwest. We have a question for you.
Yep.
This is Dan. I was just wondering, it might seem kind of silly, but is there any way to get reimbursement for large purchases through like Amazon and stuff where we can get better prices than if we went through a regular company somewhere? If we wanted to expand our wireless out and it was going to be $6,000-7,000, is there a way to do that?
I think, and others can jump in here because I've got other network coordinators on here who are also knowledgeable with this program. My feeling on that would be is if it is an eligible component and you get the pricing from Amazon and you chose to purchase it through that and the pricing was competitive to anything else you looked at, I think you certainly could. But you would treat the Amazon pricing as kind of part of a bid response.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
I mean, understandable? Okay.
Mary, this is Mark at ECMEC. Just curious on that question, how do you have a contract with them then? That would be my only question there, is how to work that.
Well, with the idea though that if he's purchasing equipment, we wouldn't normally necessarily have a contract with an equipment purchase necessarily. So it would be just the same as we do now. If you were purchasing an eligible server under the current program, you would just have a purchase agreement.
Okay, yeah, I get it. Purchase order or purchase agreement would count.
Yeah,
Yep,
I was answering him from the context of I was assuming it was specific equipment components that you might be ordering from a place like Amazon or something like that. And remember too, it would have to be eligible equipment. So make sure check that list before you order to make sure that it's E-rateable for you. Other questions? Well, as I said, the slides are available to you. I've also put a link in the slides to where all of the documents reside around the modernization order. There's also, again, guidance associated with all the forms and things that you use on the USAC website. If there's no further questions, I know you all have other things to do. Yep, go ahead.
Hey, Mary, quick question regarding funding commitment letters. In the past,
Yes.
we've waited anywhere from 3 months to 15 months before those showed up. Are they, have a plan to make that a faster process, or where are they going with this?
That's a great question, Brian. And yes, there is a plan. The FCC has given guidance to USAC that they expect them to have most of the funding commitments done by September 1st of the program year. So if you figure the application window would open in January, it would close sometime in March, they're supposed to have the bulk of their work done by September 1st. Now, USAC's kind of a little bit of pushback on that is just like, but what happens when we can't get a hold of an applicant for a month because they're on vacation or whatever? So there's going to be exceptions to that. But overall, they are under an FCC directive to get things done as much as possible by September 1st.
Mary, Stephen over here again. I'm a little anxious about competitive bidding. Many of us districts, I think most of us, already have ourselves a vendor we're kind of locked into for wireless equipment. And if we're supposed to be doing competitive bidding, does the FCC, does the SLD recognize that there's going to be a substantial preference for a certain vendor because that's the vendor we already have and the wireless controller we already have, as opposed to forcing us or expecting us to have to go with an alternative vendor who just has a lower price?
Let me give you the SLD's response to what they would say. And they would say you're supposed to do a completely open and fair competitive bidding process anytime you're leveraging E-rate discounts. What I would tell you is that you may have a preferred vendor and you still have to open it for competitive bid. But remember what I said, you have to weight price most heavily, but you do not have to be price be its only factor. So you could have other things in that bid evaluation around your expectations for, are they able to deliver within a certain amount of time. You could have other things built into those conditions. How quickly are they able to service equipment that maybe has been placed on premise at your school that's under warranty, for example. So you may have some other things that you can build into your competitive bidding review that you can make sure that you get the provider that's going to be best able to meet your needs and be cost effective. Just remember, you don't have to choose. Price is not the only consideration. You have to weight it most heavily, but it's not your only consideration.
Thank you. And
You're welcome.
One more question. I expect this is something I should instead ask the SLD, but are you familiar with a line called a transparent LAN service?
Personally, no, but somebody else in the audience who's more techie than I am, maybe. Go ahead and ask your question.
Well, all I'm wondering is whether or not that would be E-rate eligible. What it is involves running a broadband internet connection via your telephone provider so that our bus garage actually is on our school's network, but it's virtually tunneled through our telephone cooperative. And that's how we provide our internet service to them.
Mm-hmm.
And
is that a leased thing, Stephen?
Yeah.
Okay. My assumption there, and again, guys, jump in if I'm wrong, my assumption there would be the bus garage would be an eligible entity as a non-instructional facility. If that's an ongoing service you have to deliver internet access to that bus garage, it would still be eligible. If it's eligible now, it would still be eligible.
Thanks for that perspective.
Mark or Josh, do you want to weigh in on that since you're more technically astute than I am?
This is Mark. I got to look into that one a little bit, and I will try to do that and see if I can figure out a for sure answer to that. There are also a couple more questions on the back channel you might want to take a peek at.
Thank you. I'm looking at them right now. Trying to find the trail here. Oh, is there a reference that specifically states that a school bus is not considered an eligible location by Tony? Tony, and Josh has answered it, and he's absolutely right. USAC and the FCC verbally have said that during the October 13th training we had in Minneapolis. They were very specific that buses are not eligible. Again, if you tie that back to their logic about being on campus versus off campus for educational purpose, it makes some sense.
Yeah, and if you read their definitions of instructional facilities and non-instructional facilities, you can tell there that a moving vehicle is not. They don't consider that even a non-instructional facility.
Right. In which case, Tony says he's probably beating a dead horse, but he intends to pursue it. And I wish you, Tony, all the best. If I can support you in that, you just let me know. there's a question here, what is the date window for purchasing Category 2 equipment? The answer to this question is twofold. Basically, you would be applying for next year. So technically, anything that you would purchase under Category 2, you wouldn't be purchasing until after July 1. However, for the Category 2, the SLD does have a policy in place that you could get delivery as soon as after April 1st if you want to, and still get the reimbursement. But I think you couldn't be paying or billed for that equipment until after July 1, if I'm remembering what they said correctly. That might be one that I should probably just go look up and see what the exact language would be, Corey. But basically, you'd be looking at purchasing as soon as you got your funding commitment decision letter, purchasing right after July 1 typically, or thereafter. Again, if they get to you by September 1st, the way they're supposed to. Oh, Josh is clarifying here. Thank you, Josh. Category 2 equipment purchases take place during the funding year they were approved for. Okay, so keep in mind that your Category 2 budget is for 5 years. So you would have, after July 1, that full year to purchase that equipment or those services for under the Category 2. And then you would also have, they also usually will give you an extension into September, October, or however late you might need it if you need extra time, typically on a Category 2. And keep in mind, yes, your Category 2 budget, remember, is supposed to be in place for 5 years. So you can either do everything the first year, or you can do part of it the first year, part of it the second year, part of it the third year, and so on. It just is up to you, depending on where you are with your tech planning strategies.
Mary, there's a question in there. I don't know if you answered it yet. Are wireless APs used for monitoring clean air solutions considered a wireless AP and eligible?
I would say not.
I would concur. I was just kind of wondering what your thought was. I'm not sure why I think no for sure, but
well, I understand why Corey's asking, because of course it's a wireless access point, but it's not for the purposes, it's not for the educational purpose of delivering internet access to the students and the teachers in the building. It's for air monitoring. Which is why I would say no. I would imagine that's what the SLD would tell you. And Tim is saying he believes Clean Air is a software controller based, not necessarily AP based, but I don't know enough about them to debate that. So I would say probably not. When you're trying to kind of figure out these answers to some of these questions, just always bear in mind the sole purpose of the E-rate funding is to bring broadband to schools and libraries and to meet the definition of educational purpose. So if it's not having anything to do with making internet access available to your kids, and it's not about doing that for the purposes of education or library service specifically, it's probably not going to be eligible.
Mary, I have a question when you're ready.
I'm ready.
Hi, this is Gene Berg from Lewiston, Altura.
Hi.
A lot of us now probably get to take advantage of the Category 2. And my question was, one of the bullet points was basic network maintenance, I believe is what it said. What is your take on what that might be? What could we actually take advantage of there for the basic network maintenance?
For basic network maintenance, my understanding of those things, the basic maintenance piece is always about contractual maintenance that you might have on any of those eligible network components. So, for example, for your wireless network, if you had a basic maintenance contract to keep those things up and running with another provider or something, those types of things would be those types of contracts would be eligible. When you get into getting E-rate discounts on those, that's where it gets a little bit complicated, because then there are some more kind of restrictions about you can only be reimbursed for services you actually received, and so on. So that's the basic maintenance part. There's the other piece now, though, that they've added, that you can purchase a managed wireless network. So you could conceivably find a provider who's willing to come out, lease the service to you, and do all of the troubleshooting, maintenance, all that kind of stuff on you, for you on a contract basis. So that's kind of the other avenue you have if you don't have the staff or capacity to do all that yourselves. You are able to get some E-rate help with purchasing more of a service for wireless than putting in an actual network and maintaining it yourself. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Just fire away. I'll hang out until you run out of questions.
Mary, this is Barb from the Northwest. We have another question.
Yep.
Hi, this is Dan. I was just wondering if there's anything we need to watch out for as far as firewall software multi-year licensing. You can purchase for 3 years, 5 years, that sort of thing.
I see what you're saying. I think the one thing that's probably wise is we know that's a great question. We know that right now these Category 2 budgets are good for, they say they're good for 5 years. However, the FCC's also said we're going to study this after 2 years. So what happens if after 2 years they change their mind and they go with a different direction? And here you are, you've signed up, you maybe purchased something over a 3 to 6 year, whatever increment you've purchased. So usually my advice is, if you're able to, because of course if your E-rate discount goes away on it and you've got an agreement, you're still going to be liable for that cost with the provider. So the best advice I can give you is, if it's possible with that agreement, to put in a funding out clause, so to the extent that if your E-rate discounts go away, or for some reason the school can no longer afford that solution, that you have a way, you have a negotiated out to that. But otherwise you are kind of taking a risk long term with some of those arrangements by relying on E-rate for them, just given the nebulous nature of it after the next 2 years. So maybe your best bet would be to try not to go for something longer than the next 2 years, but I know that sometimes the pricing is very advantageous to do longer. Yeah. What else can I help you with? Or confuse you further with? I see some folks getting up and leaving.
Yeah, Mary, you were boring me, so I was actually going to cut out. No, I have a question. This is Bob Wheeler from Region 1.
Hi, Bob.
Hi. Lynn Day wanted to know if that was an E-rate authorized lanyard on your neck. No, what I'm really wondering, I'm really wondering on the
I got a
category.
huge discount. Yeah.
Yeah, on the category 2 funding, are NIFs like any of the service co-ops, special ed co-ops, regional information centers, are any of those eligible for category 2 funding?
They are only eligible in the sense that if you're putting something there that's a shared service that serves other eligible sites, you can't, the other districts in those cooperatives can then you can then allocate some of their budgets to provide that shared service. But in and of themselves, non-instructional facility is not eligible for category 2. They don't really count when it comes to category 2.
Well, I don't like that answer at all.
I know, I'm sorry. I wouldn't
All
have
right,
either.
thank you.
If I were still there, I wouldn't have either.
Okay.
Let's see. Katie's asking does basic network maintenance include a network consultant that we hire every year? That is a good question. My basic answer is that's not. Basic network maintenance is really more about maintenance agreements that you have on eligible equipment components to keep them running. I would say probably just a basic contract for the network consultant that's working on a lot of different aspects of your network. Generally, those types of things the SLD would look at and say, no, we wouldn't just help you fund a network consultant contract. They really are looking more for things that are tied to specific pieces of equipment or eligible components of the network. Would be my best answer, Katie, but that's one I'd want to just research a little bit since some of the language around those things has changed a little in the eligible services list.
And Mary, this is Mark at ECMEC. I'm looking at page 6 of the eligible services list where it does kind of delineate what they say is eligible for basic maintenance services. And yeah, I would concur with what you said. I think is pretty accurate. It would depend a little bit on what that consultant is doing, but if they're doing work in terms of network structure and helping you figure out how to structure your network and do things like that, that's probably not eligible. If they are actually the ones that are making configuration changes or doing software updates or doing things like that, then maybe part of what they do would be eligible. But that's what I would add to what you said.
Thanks, Mark, for looking that up. Any other questions? I'll stay here as long as you have questions, so. Bob, you can run out of the room now. I see Jamie is there with you too. Hi, Jamie. And I think that's Dan. Is that Dan hiding behind Lynn? Hi, Dan. Now I'm starting to greet people. It's getting really boring. Okay. Thank you, Mary. Thanks. Again, you can always email me or call me too. So if you think of something later, feel free. If that's it, I'm gonna say it's a wrap.
Thanks, Mary.
All right, thank you, and thanks again, Mark, for bridging all of us.
Thanks, Mary.
This is just.
You bet. You're welcome.